Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning. Welcome to the online course on sustainable architecture, and this is week 2. Today we are looking at the lecture 2 of week 2. In the previous lecture we discussed about the impact of development on water, the water element of natural environment. Today we will be discussing about the impacts of development or built environment on land and air as the elements of natural environment. Starting with the impacts on land. The 5 major impacts on land of built environment that have been identified are desertification, habitat fragmentation, habitat destruction, land degradation, and urban heat island, which we commonly know as UHI. Let us go over each one of these. So the one of the most important and negative impacts of built environment on natural environment is of desertification. Desertification is the process of conversion or transformation of fertile land into a desert, which is typically the result of deforestation, drought, or inappropriate agriculture. Every year, if we look around the earth, besides the existing deserts which are there, which are because of their geographic location and the soil quality and a lot of other factors, many new deserts are being created where the lands have eventually turned barren and are further turning into desert, which to an extent becomes an irreversible process. So more and more of the fertile land, if it converts into desert, thereby hampering the productivity and the possibility of providing food for the entire population. So we are looking at a very severe impact on land, which is desertification. Now, how is desertification caused? Because of the built environment. Now, the causes of desertification which are identified have the major cause as human activities. Human activities like animal grazing, deforestation, agriculture, and urban settlements. Besides these human activities, the climatic variations have also a role to play. Now, as we had seen yesterday in the previous lecture on impact of built environment on water, we had seen that even the water cycle is altered due to human intervention. So, to some extent, the climatic variations are also impacted by human activities or human interference into the natural system. Here we are looking only for the causes of desertification, which are a direct result of human activity. Let us go over each one of them. First is animal grazing. The increasing use of pastures for grazing animals and inappropriate grazing, irresponsible grazing, is responsible for land degradation, first the land degradation, and eventually resulting in desertification, because these animals, they eat up all the livestock, the plantation, the greenery of the pastures, thereby leaving their soil vulnerable to be eroded by wind as well as water, and gradually converting these pastures into deserts. Deforestation is another major reason. Now, deforestation is simply because of the expansion of our settlements, our cities, towns, villages. Since population is growing, we need more and more of the land to make our houses, to build our houses. We need more land to cultivate. Now, these forests are being cut down. Deforestation is happening at a very fast pace to pave way for all these needs. For acres and acres of forests are being burned or cut down to pave way for manicured plantations which humans are making. For example, palm oil plantation. Now, because of all these reasons, the forest cover of the entire world has substantially reduced, and it is reducing every year, day by day, thereby leading more and more land towards desertification. Next is agriculture. An inappropriate or improper agricultural practice often leads towards abandoning or leads to barren lands. We will see how agriculture is responsible for desertification. And the last one is urban settlements. A lot of urban settlements, in the yesterday's lecture, we had seen how an entire sea has dried up. Aral Sea has totally dried up because the urban settlement development came along the streams which were feeding Aral Sea. Similar thing is happening to other regions as well. When the water streams are blocked, when the natural course of water is not available to recharge the ground, to support the greenery, the flora and fauna, that is how the lands are converted into deserts. There are some very classic examples. If you go to Jaipur, one of the dams which used to supply to the entire city of Jaipur the reservoir of that dam has stopped receiving water simply because a lot of new settlements were planned in the catchment area of the reservoir. Now, because of this, the water is blocked from reaching the reservoir, and there is no water available downwards, the areas which were supplied, which were fed by the dams. Similar things, similar kinds of wrong practices, wrong planning of urban settlements leads towards desertification. Now, what are the areas which are most affected by desertification? As we have already seen the causes for desertification, these areas directly respond to those causes. So, the most affected areas are, first, the irrigated croplands, whose soils are often degraded by the accumulation of salts. Now, this accumulation of salts and subsequent desertification will happen because of couple of reasons. One, where overcultivation is happening. Two, where excessive use of pesticides and fertilizers is happening. And third, where wrong choice of fertilizer is being made, where the fertilizer which is not good for the soil is being used, which promotes the accumulation of salts in these irrigated croplands. The second area is rain-fed cropland, which experiences unreliable rainfall and wind-driven soil erosion. Now, that is largely because of the climatic variation. Here also wrong practices of agriculture are responsible for the desertification. Next is grazing lands, which are harmed by overgrazing. Now, these animals who graze on the grazeland, the pastures, they consume plants down to the ground, thereby totally stopping the growth of the plant, the tree, and thereby gradually year after year reducing the green cover which actually holds the soil and moisture in it, and eventually leading it to desertification. And the last one is dry woodlands, which are plagued by the overconsumption of fuel wood. So, areas, woodlands which are close to the human habitation, especially the underprivileged human population, they are at a greater risk of desertification because these woodlands are being consumed as the firewood. And since the population is increasing, this overconsumption of firewood is leading towards desertification. Now that we know the causes of desertification and also the areas which are affected by desertification, let us look at what are the effects of desertification, what desertification does besides converting a fertile land into a barren land, what desertification does. So, the soil erodes or disappears from the place. Water becomes scarce or is threatened because the soil loses its moisture. So, water table goes further down, and since the soil is eroded along with water, there is less of percolation and water becomes scarce. Because of these two reasons, since the eroded soil cannot support the plants, vegetation, and also water is scarce, the biodiversity declines. All flora and fauna is reduced in these areas, which is an effect of desertification and desertification in itself. So, what are the solutions? First and foremost solution, before I go into these micro solutions, first and foremost is to plan our habitat, plan our cities, settlements in a way that the natural environment is not impacted, affected. All the causes that we have seen, we take care of those causes through appropriate solutions. Now, we saw the cause as improper, inappropriate agriculture. So, the solutions, we can use salt traps where the soils are rich in salts. These soil traps actually consist of a wide layer of gravel beneath the soil, the topmost layer of the soil, and that controls salt from coming up to the top and converting the land into a barren land. The second is improvement in irrigation. Excessive irrigation has often led towards washing away of the topsoil. So, improvements in irrigation, for example, the one seen on the screen, this picture, such cost effective irrigation improvements, they help prevent salt accumulation and also reduce the loss of water from the soil, loss of moisture from the soil because of evaporation. Other solutions to the wrong practices of agriculture are using cover crops to cover the barren land. Often after the crop has been harvested, the main cash crop has been harvested, the farmland lies vacant and it is exposed to wind and water. Instead of that, cover crops can be used which prevent the soil erosion and they provide a cover. These crops are such crops which can quickly grow and they can be harvested faster. Next is crop rotation. If you remember, in India, we always had the traditional policy, the traditional way of farming always had the policy of crop rotation. All of you might have already seen this particular picture where the four types of crops, the legumes, the alliums, the root crops and brassicas are planted on a field in a rotation manner. This allows the soil to regain its strength. Sometimes nitrogen is replenished, sometimes other minerals are replenished, and that is how the soil continues to remain fertile. There is no over exploitation of one particular nutrient and different nutrients are replenished and are used by crops in a rotational manner. Besides the solutions to agriculture, because agriculture is a major threat to desertification, if we look at other causes, for example, grazing. So, there is rotational grazing as a solution. Instead of using the same land for rotation year after year, we can change, we can rotate the grazing pastures. India, traditional Indian settlements had a very beautiful practice of rotational grazing. Our villages, whenever the crops were harvested, so each piece of land was rotated and animals were left on these pieces of lands for grazing. they would graze, they would eat up the left out portion of the plant which was left on the land after grazing, after harvesting. Now this ensured that the stock, the waste of the agriculture was not used for burning as a fuel. It was taken up by animals, and when animals stayed on a particular piece of farmland, it also fertilized the land through the defecation, through the dung that the animals produced. So it was a win-win situation, and this way the grazing pastures were also rotated within the limits of the settlement, within the limits of the village. Now unfortunately we have stopped that practice. All the farmlands are cultivated year after year, season after season, and there is no place which is left for the cattle, the animals to graze, or in certain cases specially the crops are grown for the animals to be taken up, to be eaten, which I say as the cover crops. The second solution to desertification is terracing, which involves creation of multiple levels of flat ground like steps. So we have seen that happening in hills, but even when in plains where there is a very minor slope, terracing can be a very good way of preventing soil from getting eroded, because this way we would stop the water from flowing at a greater speed. The next is contour bunding. Now contour bunding involves the placement of lines of stones which act as a barrier to the flowing water or flowing wind, and there are wind breaks. The wind breaks, for example, the one which is seen here, the trees are planted as wind breaks in between the farmlands. Now these wind breaks, these trees, they break the speed of wind, and hence the erosion of soil from the farmland even when it is not covered by cover crops. This one is a contour bunding. Now this contour bunding is with the help of rocks, boulders, stones. Now this stops the water, this breaks the speed of water even when there is erosion of soil happening because of flowing water. So it breaks, the soil gets accumulated and only the water flows, thereby reducing the loss of nutrients from the soil. Another solution which is directly related to the human habitation and the settlement is development of appropriate technology for consumption of fuel wood. So more efficient manners like the creation, the formation of briquettes using the agricultural waste which can be used in stoves. Also the plantation, specific plantation which can be grown on the boundaries, towards the boundaries of the deserts, for example jojoba plantation. This is a hardy tree which grows in arid and semi-arid areas and requires very less of moisture to grow, and it helps the soil to regain the moisture, and it also changes the microenvironment, microclimate of the place. So such similar species have been identified, one of which is jojoba, and this can help reverse the process of desertification on the adjoining, the boundary layer of the deserts which are being created. The second and third impact of built environment on land as a natural element, they are habitat fragmentation and habitat destruction. Now because of huge infrastructural projects which are being carried out world over, the habitats are being destructed, they are being fragmented. This particular image on the screen is of the oil palm estate in Malaysia. Here an entire patch of rainforest has been cleared to pave way for oil palm estate, and majority of the oil palm plantations in Southeast Asia, they are coming directly at the cost of rainforest clearance. Rainforest clearance implies the destruction of habitat for all the species. We are not just losing out on plant species, but we are losing out on the habitat of a number of animals, insects, birds who were residing, thriving in these rainforests, thereby destructing their habitats. There is habitat fragmentation. The roads are passing through jungles, forests, and animals, the habitat for animals are fragmented. So, if 100 square kilometer of an area is required for one family of lions to survive, and the entire stock of animals in that area form an ecosystem, when a road passes through that forest, dividing it into 50 acres of each, for one family of lions it is only 50 acre available. We may not think that way. We may still think that it is just a road passing by, the animals can also cross the roads, but it unfortunately doesn't happen that way with animals, and that is why their habitats have been fragmented. They come in direct contact with humans, with our transport systems, and thereby further leading towards extinction of these species, these animal species. Entire habitats, forests are in the process of getting destructed simply because of the so-called developmental projects, because we need more land for developing our cities. And what happens to the animals, to the biodiversity, to the organisms, living creatures who are residing in these forests? They are forced out of their own habitat. They are displaced, they are at times destroyed, they become extinct and endangered simply because of this habitat destruction. Across the world, efforts are being put in to preserve the habitats from getting destructed if they have been identified as the habitats for certain species, mainly the endangered species. But unfortunately, the species which are still large in number on earth as on date are not being considered while destructing their habitats, the natural habitats. Another impact on land is land degradation. Land degradation is the first step towards desertification. So, majority of the causes which lead towards desertification are also the reasons which lead towards degradation, which is overgrazing, which is wrong practices of cultivation, farming, which is wrong use or over use of forests, deforestation. So, the same causes also cause land degradation, which subsequently result in desertification. So, the reasons for land degradation, and which also further leads to land contamination, includes deforestation or land clearance, agricultural depletion of nutrients from the soil, overgrazing, inappropriate irrigation, urban sprawl and commercialized development, contamination of soil and acidification of soil because of setting up of industries and dumping of this waste into the soil, soil erosion, loss of carbon from the soil because of erosion, vehicle off-roading where the fuel, petrol or diesel is getting into the soil because of the vehicles which are off-roaded. Quarrying of stone, ores and minerals, mining in general, is another major reason for land degradation and land contamination. Increase in the size of field due to economies of scale, reducing shelter for wildlife, and as hedgerows and copses they disappear, that is another reason. Now, that for majority of these problems, the reason, the bottom line, the core reason is that human population has been increasing. We are not controlling our population, we are not limiting it, and we are not limiting our needs. We are becoming more and more of a consumerism society, where we need more and more of products produced for fulfilling our needs. We need more food, we need more industrial products instead of the lifestyle where we required less. We now need more, and all of it we can't consume, we waste more, and for all of that we again need soil for growing more and for dumping that waste back into the soil. The last one is urban heat island or UHI. Urban heat island is a city or metropolitan area that is significantly warmer than its surrounding rural areas due to human activities. Now, what kind of human activities result in urban heat island and how? So, if you look at the causes, hard and darker surfaces lead towards urban heat island. Now, how is urban heat island caused? During the day, when solar radiation receives these surfaces, they absorb certain amount of heat. Some part is reflected back and some part is absorbed depending upon the material property. Now, this heat which is absorbed, since it is constant, in the night time when the environmental temperatures, outdoor temperatures are low, this body, this surface which was at a higher temperature, which is at a higher temperature because of absorption of all that heat, will now re-radiate this heat. Now, this re-radiated heat is trapped in the atmosphere, and that is what causes the atmospheric temperature during the night time to increase. This is the phenomena of urban heat island. Now, what kind of surfaces, what kind of materials will store more heat and will re-radiate this heat? Hard surfaces and dark surfaces. If you look at a grass lawn and if you walk on it during the day or night, do you feel the change in the temperature of the surface? Not really, not much. However, if you walk on a paved road during the morning hours and during the evening hours, when the sun has already fallen on the surface, we feel that difference in the surface temperature. That is simply because the surface, the material has absorbed a lot of heat because it had the capacity. So, majority of the materials which are being used in our cities are hard materials. They absorb a lot of heat. Unlike our villages in traditional times, where the homes in the villages, the huts were made out of mud, earth and organic material like weeds and reeds. Now, they did not absorb heat. Their capacity to absorb heat is much lower. They reflect more, and that is why not only the hut would remain cooler, but also the surrounding environment would remain cooler. Another material, for example, is plant itself. Now, if there is solar radiation which is falling on a plant or a tree, it would absorb the radiation and use it for making its own food, instead of absorbing it and re-radiating in the night. The plants don't do that. Unfortunately, in our cities, the plants are reducing. We hardly have green cover. We only see a lot of hard surfaces, the vertical hard surfaces, the horizontal hard surfaces, and that is why there is an increased temperature. There is also a lack of moisture. There is less of evapotranspiration which is happening because of lesser number of trees which are there, the greenery which is there. Together with increased surface area for reflection and absorption of sunlight, which is also called the urban canyon effect, blocking of wind because of the urban morphology which is there, all these four reasons lead to an increase in the temperatures of the urban area, the urban settlement. Now, because the temperature has increased, the energy which is required to create comfort inside the buildings through the use of air conditioners and through the use of air conditioned automobiles on roads, the anthropogenic heat from the human activities that further increases, leading to an addition of temperature increase, further increase of temperature. Another reason of urban heat island is high levels of pollution. All these vehicles and industries which emit the greenhouse gases, they absorb more and more of heat and thereby making our microenvironment, microclimate hotter, warmer. All of this leads to the loss of biodiversity, growth of non-native species which we have also seen as alien invaders, altering the local wind patterns, development of clouds and fog which are localized. So, we see smog in Delhi, but we do not see it as we move out of the NCR region when we go towards less urbanized areas. Varying rates of humidity and precipitation, additional shower and thunderstorm activity because of the negative pressure which is created. And there are some social impacts like increased mortality rate in children, increased temperature of water bodies, further leading to consumption of energy for creating comfortable environment inside buildings. And how can we mitigate? The very simple answer to that is increasing the vegetation. More and more trees and green surfaces should be maintained to reduce the urban heat island impact because there will be lesser absorption of radiation. The second important thing is using high albedo and reflecting material. Materials which reflect more, they directly reflect the radiation instead of absorbing them. Such materials should be used. For example, light colored surfaces, smooth surfaces on the top of the buildings. Third mitigation measure is to use pervious layers to allow water percolation. If we have very hard paved surfaces, roads, they allow for less and less moisture, thereby reducing the evapotranspiration, which further increases the impact of urban heat island. And reduction in anthropogenic heat through policies like carpooling or increasing the efficiency of equipment that is being used in homes. Through such measures, we can reduce the urban heat island in our cities. The next we have is impacts on air. This was a protest against the falling quality of air at Highland Park Optimist Club wearing smog gas masks at a banquet. People started realizing, and today we are more aware of how the air quality is changing. We know what is the quality of air, yet there is not much effort towards improving the quality of air. The air is actually becoming poisonous. If we look at this map, the world map, it clearly shows the quality of air across the world, and we see particularly Asia and Africa as the most polluted, having the most polluted air. If we look at the WHO guideline values for the quality of air, we realize that large part of the world actually does not have clean air to breathe currently. So, what are the further impacts? Air pollution. Now, this is because of human activities only. One, we are cutting down trees, which can reduce the amount of pollution that is present in the air through absorption. Plants and trees, they absorb a lot of different hazardous chemicals which are suspended in the air. So, the tree cover is reducing, and simultaneously the pollutants are more and more pollutants are being added into the air through our industries, through our transport systems, through the use of equipment for creating comfortable environment inside our buildings. All of them leading to more and more greenhouse gas emissions, more and more ozone depleting substances, more and more substances which have a higher global warming potential. All this together is leading towards air pollution. Now, because of air pollution itself is a huge problem. Because of air pollution, there are further problems which arise. For example, acid rain, global warming and climate change. These are interrelated. They are impacting each other. Ozone damage, the problem of smog in cities, health problems which are the social problems, for example skin cancer, respiratory diseases, they are increasing because of air pollution. The loss of ecosystem because of air pollution, loss of flora and fauna, and ultimately it is affecting the supply of food and the quality of food which is available to the humankind. What are the impacts on health of air pollution? We have more and more, specifically in India, we have more and more cases of bronchitis. Children right from the early ages are affected by asthma, and there is an increasing number of asthma symptom days for children in the ages of 5 to 19. There are additional cases of illnesses that directly lead to impact the work activities, normal work activities, thereby not just impacting the health but impacting the economy. There is a greater impact of air pollution on human body as listed, and besides that we have a lot of investment which is going towards the health care, which is because of air pollution. So the welfare costs are increasing. If we look at the welfare costs in different countries, we see that countries with higher air pollution, greater air pollution, they spend more towards the welfare costs. So such are the impacts on air because of the built environment. If we look at the impacts of built environment on water, land and air collectively, we realize that there is not a single impact which is not there because of human intervention. Everywhere human activities have led to pollution, contamination, loss of ecosystem, and in the end all of this is leading to some or the other socio-cultural problem. I will conclude this lecture here, and in the next lecture we will look at the socio-cultural impact of built environment. So it's not just on natural environment, and as I said in my introductory lecture, I will repeat it again, that we are not worried of the impacts our activities have on the natural environment. We are worried of the impacts that this degradation of natural environment has on us as human beings. We are worried of the socio-cultural impacts this development and this loss of natural environment has on humankind. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.